Hey guys, it's Casey and welcome back for part 6. I believe we're on part 6 now of our tower defense tutorial. So what we did in the last video is that we set up a basic widget UI and we set up our player, our player pawn, our player controller, and it's really to handle our camera so that now we have our top-down view and we can pan around. Before we get back into what we left off with at the very end with our widget, what we're actually going to do is we're going to back up and we're going to go back inside of our player pawn. And there's one little piece of kind of functionality that I missed before we moved on. And what we missed is that if I hit play, you can see how we can just pan off into the distance. There's nothing stopping us from doing so. This is an issue for a few different reasons, but for the main one is that we want to direct our players' attention into our world. Depending on how big your level is, you want that to be set up in a few different ways. But what we really need our code to do is that when we add all of this together and we get our resulting location that we want to pan to, what we want to do is we want to break this and we want to make a vector off of our location. And remember, this is the code for our panning. This is our panning code. At this part, what we're doing is we were getting the current camera position or the current position of our camera actor. We were adding into it the direction that our mouse was that we wanted to pan in. We were adding them together and then we were setting the location. We need to limit ourselves for how far we can go. And how we can do that is if we break this vector at the end and we make it again, what we can do is we want to manipulate the x and y. We want to make sure our x doesn't go too far negative in the world or too far positive. The same with the y. Our z, that's our height. We don't want to touch that. And the way that we can do that is that we can clamp. And with floats, we can clamp it, and we can do the same if we want to copy paste that. We can clamp our y also. So now what we need to do is we need to figure out where in the world is our minimums and our maximums for both our x and the y. So this is where you run into, normally when you're coding anything and even making games, there are several ways of doing things. If we wanted to, we could take like anything we wanted. We could just like grab like a sphere, we could drop it into our world, and we could say, okay, we only want our camera to go to here, and the same with the other side. Figure out the values and then punch them into our clamp here. If that's what you want to do, that's perfectly okay. That can be a perfectly fine solution, say if you only have one map in your tower defense. But if you're going to have a bunch of different maps that have a bunch of different sizes, that can potentially be an issue. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a simple little actor that will help us do these values. So what I'm going to do is we'll just do it inside of our player here. And what we're going to do is we're going to right click. I'm going to do a blueprint class, and we are going to do a normal actor because we just want this to exist in the world. And we're going to call this our camera clamp actor, I guess we can call it. Just super simple, super obvious. We know that this is what we're going to use to clamp our camera, our player camera. So let's drop this actor in the world. It doesn't really matter where we put him. Actually, we could, let's put him at 0, 0, 0. And that's going to be for a good reason, in that if we put him to 0, 0, 0, our resulting vectors that we're going to get off of him no longer are going to be in relative space, they're going to be in world space. And we'll get to that in just 1 second. So let's open up our new actor that we just made, and what we simply want to do is we want to create 4 variables. We want to create 4 vectors. So let's create vector 1, and we will call this, we'll call it minus x. Let's call it minus x clamp. Sure, we'll do that. That'll be really obvious. Let's create him a vector, and what we're going to do is, along with naming him negative x clamp, making him a vector, we are going to make him, actually, we could do this 2 ways. No, let's do this in 4. Yeah, we'll do this with 4, because not all levels are going to be square. I don't want to get too far in the thought I just had in my head, because it doesn't really have a purpose, but we want to make 4 of these. But before we do that, let's make it instance editable, and let's show 3D widget. So let's do that. And what we're going to do is we were going to duplicate him, and now we're going to call it plus x clamp, and then we're going to duplicate him again, and we're going to do minus y clamp, and we will duplicate again, and we will call plus y clamp. So now, with all of these 4 variables created, and having all of them instance editable and showed 3D widget, that's why I duplicated them. If we go back to our actor that we placed at 0, 0, 0, you can see we have these 4 little diamonds, and we can grab them one at a time. So with our positive y clamp, let's move it to the positive y max of our level that we want our camera to stop at. If like I click on some of these objects in the world, you can see how that's positive y, and if I go left, that's negative y. So I know this positive y one, we want it to be on this right side wall. So if we go back to our actor, and I grab that positive y clamp, let's move it all the way over here to this wall, and I will stop it there. And let's just do this for all four. So what is the next one that I just grabbed? I grabbed the negative y clamp. I know negative y is over here, and I can do that once again by clicking on actors if I wanted to, and I can just see their locations, and I can see the farther left I go, the more negative. So I place that on that left wall, like so. And if I go back and I try and grab the next one, let's see which one this one is. This is going to be our positive x, so let's see. This down is negative x, up is positive x, so let's go back. Let's grab that positive x, let's place it against our positive wall. Go all the way over here, and then last but not least, it's going to be our negative x, and we know that is going to be on this bottom wall. So let's grab that in there. Now with that done, what we can do is now we have references to the extremes of our map, right? So now we know the negative y extreme, the positive y extreme, and then same with the x. What we're going to do is we are going to feed these four vectors over to our player, and that we're going to use these to tell our camera where we are not going to go past. Like, these are going to be the barriers for our x's and our y's on our camera. The reason why I put it at 0, 0, 0 is because normally when we do these show 3D widgets on these vectors here, they are normally relative to our actor. And we did this earlier, if you remember. We did this with our spawner, with our end location. We had to add our end location back into our spawner location to get the world location of our actor. But if our actor is at 0, 0, 0, it means that these four relative locations we have are technically world locations, because if we add them back into their parent, well, the parent's at 0, 0, 0, so we know that these final vectors, they're good to go. So what we need to do now is we need to get our player to have a reference to this actor that we just made. We're going to do a slightly kind of a cheating method of doing it. I use this in my games sometimes, and it's going to be get all actors of class. Normally you want to limit how often you use get actors of class, but even if we highlight get all actors of class, you'll see this is a slow operation, use with caution, don't do this every frame. When we do this only at the first tick of our game, or the first tick of our actor, event begin play, we will only run this code once. Even if there's a very slight performance hit, that performance hit will only be felt for maybe one frame of our game, or like maybe a 1 second, less than a second in our game. We might lose 1 FPS for using this. I'm okay with that. That's not a big deal to me. This is a situation where performance is not an issue. So with get all actors of class, on begin play of our player pawn, we want to get all actors of our camera clamp actor. So if I take camera, we see we have our camera clamp actor. I know we only need one camera clamp actor in our world. We're not going to have multiple of these. We only need one of them dragged into our world. So off of this array pin, I just need to get 0. I know we're only ever going to have one of these. And with that, what we can do is now we can do one of two things. You can see here that now that we have a camera clamp actor reference, we can get out the X, and we can get out the negative X, we can get out the positive X, and we can do the same for the Y's. So let's get our Y's, and we have a decision here. We could, oops, I grabbed the same Y, let's get Y, let's get the positive Y. So we have a few decisions here. One thing we could do is that we could just use these vectors like so. We could promote all 4 of these to variables and store it inside of our actor. We have a few choices with that. I think probably what I'm comfortable with is I'm just going to promote this actor that we have here, this actor reference to a variable, and we'll just call this our clamp reference. And now with that, let's just move that over, let's set it, and now what we can do is that we can get our reference, and that if I control click, grab that there, I can move the pins over, and that we just need to redo this, this get 0 back to our set. And then with this, now we have our clamps for our camera. So what I meant by there's a few different ways of doing this. We could have taken these 4 and that we could have just promoted these to variables if we wanted to. Maybe that's actually the best thing. Actually, let's do that, because I can foresee what we're about to do is we need to break these vectors to get specifically what the X is. So what we're actually going to do is I'm going to delete this reference. I'm going to delete the variable we just made because I'm realizing it is actually better. It says it's in use. That is in use here, so I'll delete that. Now we can delete our our variable there. I'm going to hook this back up because I'm realizing we need to break these. We need to find what exactly is that x and what exactly is that y. And what we're going to do is we're going to promote these to variables. So with this negative x clamp, I want to take the x, I want to promote it to variable, and we'll call this our negative x float. We can call that, we could rename it the same thing to be our negative x clamp. I'm just not doing that to try and not confuse you guys. Maybe I've done that by flip-flopping what I want to do. Maybe that's confused you. I apologize if so. But once again, I'm not trying to pre-plan when I'm doing these videos. I am just trying to walk through my normal course of logic. Sometimes I go back and forth on what I actually want to do in my code. I hope I'm not confusing you too bad when I do that. So let's give ourselves some space. Let's drag that up. And all I'm doing here is I'm with all four of these vectors. I'm grabbing the x from the negative x and the positive x, storing that like so in new variables. And then I'm going to do the same for the y in our y variables. Promote to variable, and this is our negative y float. Let's get that, and then we're going to do it one more time. Promote to variable, and we're going to call this our plus y float. So now we have our float stored. So the issue with what we could have done is I could have just taken these like so, and I could have copy pasted these down, and then we could have just hooked this up here. But the issue is that when you break vector, that is a command that you're giving the game. You're telling the game, hey, I want to take this vector and I want to break it off and get a specific value. If we're doing this on tick, because that's what our camera panning is doing, and that potentially we're doing this 4 times on tick, that can be a lot of redundant math that we don't need to do. Instead of breaking this vector 4 times on tick, what we can do is that we can break it once, store the value that we need, and now on tick, all we need to do is get our floats. So instead of taking a vector, breaking the vector, and then getting the float on tick, we can just do this once on begin play, store the value, and now we can just use that value without that performance hit. So let's now grab all of our values, and what I'm doing here, if you don't know that, if you just click and drag off a variable, when you drop it, you'll get a get or a set, which is perfectly fine if you want to do it that way. But if you hold Control while you grab your variable and drop it, it will be a get. And if I hold Shift while grabbing a variable, it will actually, it's Alt, sorry. If I hold Alt while grabbing a variable, it turns into a set automatically. Here, I just want to do gets, so I can hold Control and I can drop them in. And that I could just skip that one little key press. Just little convenience things to help speed things up. So now what we're doing is we're just clamping our x here. What is our minimum? That will be our negative x. What is our maximum? That is our positive x. What is our minimum on the y? That's our negative y. And what is our maximum? That's our positive y. So all that work that we just did by creating an actor, moving its locations in the world, getting a reference to our actor, and doing all this, and then adding it back in here, what that does is that just makes it so that if I ever need to make multiple levels in my game, all I need to do is I need to drag in our camera actor into the world, set it to be 0, 0, 0, and then take my 4 extremes, our 4 vectors here, and I just drag it to the extremes of our level, and then we're set up and we're good to go. The other way that we could have done this is that we could have just naturally saw where in the world is this wall, take the values of the walls, and then just punch in the values in these minimum and maximums. We could have just naturally punched in a number there. But that makes it to where if we ever need to edit our level, if we ever want to make new levels, we have to go back and edit our code. But think about this. If we have multiple levels in our game, and they're all different sizes, how do we tell our game which minimum and maximum to use based on which level we're in? This is a natural way of doing it, because actually, so let's imagine a world in which we punched our values in. I had like a negative 1000x and a positive 1000y. Let's say that we have 2 levels in our game, and this is the first level, and it was those values. What if our player then switched over to our second map? If we're using the same exact player pawn, what if that map had extremes of negative 2000 and positive 2000? We would need to be checking which map we're in, we would need to be storing different values, and we would need to be doing some type of complicated, not complicated, but some extra levels of logic to determine which map we're in to see which minimums and which maximums we're in. If we're always going to use this actor, no matter which level we're in, this works in all levels, because think about it. At the start of our actor, inside of the level, we're getting our actor and we're getting out its values. So no matter which map we're in, as long as we have our actor set up with its extremes, this piece of code will update to no matter which level we're in. So I think that's kind of the interesting thing. is that some of these solutions, there's multiple solutions of how you do things. Some of them can be more convenient for different reasons. If you only plan on having one level ever in your game, this solution might be technically overkill, if there's such thing, where plugging the values might have been better there. But since this is more of a dynamic way of doing it, this kind of transfers across maps, I would prefer to probably do it this way. So that's how we're going to do it. And now if we hit play, if we pan, our camera should stop. There we go. I'm at the bottom of our screen, our camera stopped. If I go right, the camera stops. If we go all the way up, our camera stops. And then if we go all the way left, our camera will eventually stop. And what we can do is that if we think this is too far out, we can come back and we can adjust. We could drag these further inside the wall. Say we think that's still too far out for our camera to go, we can grab these values and we can drag them wherever we want, and then our game updates to handle that. So that's the kind of the cool thing why I call it more dynamic, is that it automatically updates how we need it to. So with that solved, let's get back into doing our tower spawning. So if we go back to our widget that we made in the last video, we just made super simple 2 buttons, and now we named these buttons, and we have our chair button, we have our bush button. Let's do these events on the bottom right. So with our button selected, on the very bottom right, we need to know when does our player click them. And with widgets, when you have buttons, you get events down here in the bottom, and we can do a plus sign. And now we have our on-clicked bush button. We can go back to our chair button and do the same. And now we have our buttons. So what we want to do here is that we want to, with these buttons, we want to create kind of what I guess you could call a ghost tower. What we want to do is when we click these buttons, if I hit play, I hit my Q key to bring up our buttons. When I press this button, what I want it to do is I want it to create a bush tower, but not a final bush tower, and I want it to be on my mouse location so that when I move around my mouse, this little like half invisible tower is following my mouse, and that where I click, it places the tower. So there's kind of a few things going on there. And the first thing that I know is that I don't want to create a normal tower on our mouse, because that could be awkward, right? Think about we're in the middle of our level. I click this bush tower and I'm moving it around with my mouse, but I haven't decided where to place it. If we spawn a normal tower on our mouse, it could be shooting enemies. While I haven't placed it yet, it could be shooting at enemies. And that's kind of an issue. So like we just did with our clamps for our camera, there could be several ways that we set up this ghost tower. We could use our normal tower blueprint, and we could kind of store a boolean inside of it and be like, hey, are we a ghost? Then we could stop some logic. We could create a child blueprint and handle a ghost in there, but I could foresee some issues there also. So what I really just want to do, some people may disagree, different kind of coders or programmers might disagree with this, but I actually want to create an entirely separate actor for this. I want to right click, I want to make a new actor, and let's make that, and let's just call it our ghost, or let's call it our builder tower. Let's call it builder tower BP, because I don't want this to be the actual tower. I want this to be kind of the builder version of that tower. So let's open it up. Let's go in the viewport, and now we want to add a static mesh component like we did with our normal tower, and we will call this our ghost mesh. And for default purposes, let's just set this to be like our chair, just for default purposes. We will dynamically change that later. And what we want to do is we want to make a new material. We want there to be a clear visual distinction between when we're dragging around a tower and building it and when it is actually a tower. So what I want to do inside this tower folder, I want to right click, and we're going to make 2 very simple materials. The first one we're going to call this our green, I believe it's called, is it opaque? I believe the word for it is opaque. Let me think, translucent, opaque? I think, yeah, it is opaque, because opaque means opacity, yes. So we're going to call it green opaque, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go inside of it, and what we want to do is we want to change the blend mode. No, is it translucent? We want translucent. I got it wrong. My logic was not correct. Let's call it green translucent. Sorry about that, translucent. I might know how to make video games, but I do not know my terminology. There you go. So blend mode translucent allows us to use this opacity marker. If we go back and we set it to opaque, we can't set the opacity of our material. What we want this to be is we want this to be like half invisible. So with translucency, we get that opacity. So what we'll do is off this opacity, we will take constant, because we just want to feed in a constant value. Let's try 0.5. We might experiment with these values a little bit, and then with our base color, let's do a vector 3, or what can we do here? Is it make vector? Let's right click and open space. What happens when we type vector? Vector parameter? We could use that. Okay, a constant 3 vector. Let's use that. So what a constant 3 vector gives us is it is an R, a G, and a B, and that represents what color we're using. Or actually, I think it will actually be our hue saturation value is technically what that might stand for. Let's drag our value all the way up so that we get our color, and let's make this a green. We'll just make it really, really green, and if we hit OK, that hopefully should update. There it goes, and you can see now we have this kind of half invisible, half opaque, or opacity. I guess opaque isn't the right word. Let me stop saying that. We have this half see-through green color. So now let's see what that looks like if we go back inside of our builder tower. Let's change the material of our static mesh, and let's search for that green we just made. So if I type in green, I can see green translucent. You can see here. All right. So now we could tell, hey, this is a tower that we haven't quite built yet, and the reason why I'm making it green is because I know later there's going to be situations where we need to say, hey player, you can't build that tower there, and we're going to turn it red. So let's go ahead and let's make that red material now also. So I'm just going to right click the material we just made. I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to call it red translucent. Let's go inside of our red translucent. I'm going to double click that constant vector that we have there, and I'm just going to change it from green over to red. I'm going to hit save. It should ask me something, is it not? No, actually it might not ask me anything. Let's see here. Save. Let's save the green also, and now we can close out of them. If you don't save before you exit out of these, like let me try that real quick. I'm going to slightly change the red. If I change what it is, and let's say I hit apply, I think it should apply the changes. Is it going to do it when I exit? No, okay. If you make a change without hitting apply, it's going to say, are you sure you want to quit? This is like the only thing that ever does it. Like if you make a change in a blueprint and close the blueprint, it doesn't say anything to you, but if you do it with materials, it might pop up a window and it'll say, are you sure you want to quit without saving? Just make sure you save it before you close it if you ever make changes that you want to keep with materials. So now we can also check our red if we want to. We can punch in red, and there we go. So now we can flip-flop between this later on when we need to. I'm going to set it back to green, but now we have that set up. So inside of our widget, what we want to do is when we click these buttons, we want to create that actor. So what we want to do is we want to create actor, or spawn actor, sorry. Spawn actor from class. We want to grab our builder tower BP. And now what we can do is we can grab this builder BP. This transform, we're not going to be very concerned about it. We are just going to make a transform. That is all fine with me because we are going to update the location of where this is based on our mouse. So for the first little tick of its existence, we're okay with it being underneath the world. And actually what we might do is let's just set this to be like -200 so that it spawns underneath the world. So just in case someone barely sees it for 0.01 seconds spawned at a weird location before it snaps to the mouse, we'll spawn it underneath the world before it snaps there. I don't think there's a reason to get our mouse location and do it here also. I just believe we're doing extra math. And once again, we always want to spawn. We don't want to do anything with collisions, so always spawn, ignore collisions. And what this can do now is if we want to test it real quick, if we hit play, we hit Q, and I believe we did this for our bush. Now if we hit eject and we go underneath the world, we have our little green half invisible chair underneath the world. Great. So what we want to do now is we want to do some things with this tower. How can we do this? So I know eventually what we want to do. Should we jump forward to that? Let's handle the simple stuff first, or let's not jump any logic. Let's do the location of this. Since we were talking about it a second ago, let's update the position of this. So I know what I want to do is I want to update the location of this based on tick. So what we will do is, should we do this inside of our tower? Let me think. There could be an issue of doing this here based on... Actually, no, that would actually not affect anything. I'm thinking ahead on some code based on multiplayer in case you ever want to convert the game to multiplayer, and I don't believe there will be any issues doing the code here. I had to think about it for a second. There would be no issues with multiplayer doing it here. So what we can do is with our builder tower, so what we're doing is we're spawning our builder tower, and then inside of our builder tower on tick, we want to update its location to match our player's mouse. So what we will do is we will get our player controller, and what we want to do is if we type mouse, I forget what the exact name of this is, but we don't want to get mouse position. We want to not get, let's see, if we say maybe cursor, I know it's like get hit result. There we go. Get hit result under mouse cursor for objects, for channel. Let's start with object. We might eventually move that over the channel, but I think we can start with for object. And what object type do we want to search for? Let's make an array, and let's search for the object type that is our ground. Our ground should just be world static. Like, I think this is default a cube that we have here, and if we check its collision, it should be world static. Collision presets are default. If we go to custom, it should pop up the additional items. It is a world static. There we go. So we can just set that back to default. So world static should do just fine for us. If your level uses terrain, I believe terrain is also world static. I think you can check the collision on your terrain. I think terrain will also be world static. I don't think it would make sense for it to be anything else. But potentially, if your game uses something else for the floor, all you need to do is change the style here. So for us, we need world static, and off of our hit result, we want to break. And actually what we should do is always when you do a trace, because that is technically what this is, we're doing a trace underneath our mouse. What we want to start with is a branch to make sure we actually hit something. And if we hit something underneath our mouse, what we want to do is we want to get the location of where we just hit. So with this location, we want to set the actor location of ourself, because what we are is we are our ghost tower, and what we want to do is we want to set its location to be wherever our mouse is impacting the ground. So let's try that out. Let's see what that looks like. So on play, if I move my mouse around, is our tower, or we haven't spawned our tower. What am I talking about? We need to hit Q, hit bush tower, and now you can see there, hey, how about that? We spawned our bush tower, and it is following our mouse. That looks pretty good to me. So what we'll do is I want the UI to disappear. If we go back to our UI, after I select what tower we want, it's keeping my mouse location. It's keeping the widget pulled up. I don't want that. So what we're going to do is after we select what tower we want to do remove from parent. So now when I go back and I spawn our widget, if we hit Q, hit our tower, it should disappear. There we go. So now what we want to do is the next functionality we will add is that after we can drag our tower around, when I left click, I want it to build the tower when I left click. So what we're going to do is we need to know when does our player hit left click. There could be a few different ways of doing that, but what I want to do is I want to communicate it from our camera actor, from our player's camera. This is our, sorry, that's our clamp actor. That's why that doesn't have the code. I want to do it from our player camera pawn, the pawn actor that we have. Sorry, I misspoke very briefly. What I want to do is I want to know when does our player hit left click, and I want to tell our tower widget to build. So what we're going to do is we are going to make a new input. I'm going to go into our project settings, under input, under action mappings, I'm going to do a new action, and I'm going to call this our, see, we could call this left click, but what you might end up, actually, no, we could do left click. I think I'm comfortable with doing left click, because if we check what the action is called, it should be called left mouse button, because what could happen is if you name your action mapping the same exact thing as one of these peripheral inputs, which would be like your keyboard or your mouse, you can run into some confusion, so just be careful about that. So what we're going to do now, with that made, we called it our left click, and you can see here we get left click. You can see how when I type in left click, it pops up some of these keyboard events, so you can need to be careful about naming your action events the same exact thing as some of these keyboard or mouse events. So on left click, I now want to communicate to our tower selection actor what we want to do. So to do that, we need to communicate. How do we communicate? Well, we communicate with actor references. So what I want to do is that when we create our widget, I want to tell our widget who our player is. I want to give it a actor reference. So let's go inside of our tower widget. I want to make a new variable, and I want to make this variable equal to our player camera pawn. So I'm going to just call this our player reference, and I'm going to change the variable type to be player camera pawn. I'm going to store that as a object reference, and now back inside of our player camera pawn, when we spawn our widget, when we create our widget, what I want to do is I want to drag off its return value, and I'm going to do set player reference. And you can see now I have access to that variable, and I want to set that variable to be equal to self. So what we're doing is when we create the widget, we are going to tell it who our player is. And who is our player? Well, since we're inside of our player's blueprint, we can tell it just, hey, this is our self. We want our widget to know who our player is and who our self is. There's a few different ways that we could have done this. We could have technically inside of here got in the player pawn, like we could do get player pawn. We could have done some stuff with that, but this to me is how I would normally do it. So now what we can do is we can go inside of our tower builder, and we can also let that know who our player is. So what we can do is actually, should we do that, or should we, we'll actually do it the other way. Instead of telling our builder tower who our player is, we will tell our player who our build tower is. So what we're going to do is we are going to make a variable inside of our player pawn, and we are going to make it our, we'll call this our builder tower, we'll call it our builder tower reference, and we will change this to be a builder tower BP object reference. And now what we're going to do is, since our widget knows who our player is, what we can then do inside of our widget is we can get that player reference that we just made and that we just referenced inside of our player, and now we can do inside of our player reference, we can set our builder tower reference, and that when we spawn our builder tower to place it in the world, we can, hey, tell our player who that builder tower is. And now you can see how we're kind of linking up so that everyone knows who everybody is. Now what we can do inside of our player is that now when we left click, we can technically have a builder tower reference. So what we can do now is, if we go inside of our builder tower, we can make a custom event, and we can call it place tower. And what we can do is that we can now, what we want to do is, while we're dragging around our ghost tower in the world, so if I pull up our widget, while we're dragging this in the world, when I left click, I want to replace this half invisible tower. I want to kill it, or I want to destroy it, and I want to spawn in its place the actual tower. So what we're going to do is, on place tower, what I want to do is, before we destroy our actor, I want to spawn actor from class, and I want to spawn an actual tower now. I want to spawn our, what do we call our towers? We call our towers just tower BP, nice and simple. So let's search tower BP, and I want to spawn the tower BP at the exact location our tower is. We can add some additional logic later if we need to, but for now, we just want to spawn it where our builder tower is. So inside of our builder tower, we can get actor transform, and we can just plug those in. Once again, we always want to spawn, at least for now we always want to spawn, and we'll do some extra logic later to see when we should and shouldn't be able to place our tower. And now what we can do is, after we spawn this actual tower, we want to destroy ourself. We just want to type destroy, and you can see target is self. So now what we can do with this custom event, since we have a reference to our builder tower inside of our player pawn, what we can do now is, with this reference, we can search for our event, and hey look, we have place tower. But what we want to do before we place tower is that our player might be left clicking whenever he wants during the game. We need to make sure that when he is left clicking, that this builder reference is actually valid. So we're going to do an is valid, hook that up, and if we do, when we left click, if we do have a builder tower referenced, we have it following our mouse, when we hit place, we want to place it. So let's see if that works. On play, I can hit Q. So I actually see an issue right now. At the start of the game, if I just hit Q, nothing happens. I believe that's because we don't have the focus of our game set or something like that. If we left click and then hit Q, it pops up. We might fix that a bit later. I'm not exactly sure why that is. That might take me a few minutes of debugging, so I might do that after the video. I know that has to do something with we're not like focused to our actor yet, maybe. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but I'm going to figure that out after the video probably. So when we hit Q, we get our tower. Now we have the reference to our tower, and now if I left click, you can see we spawned a tower. You can see it created the tower, and now we can see its overlaps. It's a tower. Pretty cool. But there's kind of one piece of functionality really missing to me, and that is we are just creating just the normal actor. We're not telling it what we want the tower to be. So let's set that up now. So you can remember all the references for our towers, or all the data for our towers, we stored inside of a data table. So now what we can do inside of our widget is we can actually, before we create this ghost tower, we can check to see what tower we should be spawning. So what we're going to do is we're going to go inside of our builder tower, and we're actually, or not our builder tower, we are going to go inside of our actual tower. So let's open up our tower BP. And now that temporary code I made a while ago that I said we would replace later, that's what we're going to do now. On event begin play, I had this temporary code that we had. I'm just going to copy paste it, and I'm going to delete it off of begin play, save and compile, and I'm going to go over inside of our tower selection widget, and I am going to paste it. So what I'm going to do now is I know, or actually let's delete this tower init. We don't need it just yet. I want to delete that, and now I'm actually going to delete this too for now, but that's good to know that we need to be saving this variable here. So what I'm going to do is when we press one of the buttons, what we're going to do is we're going to get the data table and row, and what we're going to do is we're going to feed a dynamic value into here. We're going to make it so that we can select bush or chair kind of dynamically, or we can at least reuse this code. So what I want to do is I want to take this row name and I'm going to promote it to a variable, and I'm going to call this our row name variable. Sure, this one, it's not too important what we call it. And what I want to do is when we click on bush, I want to set that to be equal to bush. And when we click on chair, I want to do the same thing, and I want to set this to be equal to chair. So now we can reuse all the code afterwards. We don't need to copy paste this code for each one and use these drop downs. Instead of using these drop downs, we can just feed in the name that we would have selected inside of those drop downs. So when we do that and we find a row, what we want to do is we want to save this out right here. Why is it called wildcard? That should be called, I don't know. Should that be called a wildcard? I guess it should be. If we promote it to a variable, what is the variable? Okay, if we promote it to a variable, you can see it's called a tower struct. I don't want to make the variable here. I was just testing it out because it's a little weird for that to be called a wildcard here. I know I want to store this inside of our builder tower, because when we eventually build our actual tower, I want to feed here its tower's data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call this, what did we call it inside of our tower BP? We called this our tower struct. Let's call it, we're going to call it something very simple. Let's just, similar, let's call it our data, let's call it our tower data. We'll just call it that. And let's change this to be our tower struct. So now, with our tower data variable made, if we go back inside of our widget, when we spawn our builder tower, now we can take that and we can set our tower data. Perfect. And what we can do is we can take the out row that we have from our data table, we can punch that into our tower, and there's one more thing that I want to do. And I know not only do we want to save the data of what our tower is, but I actually want to change what the visible static mesh of our tower is. Because when our player left clicks and moves around his mouse to build this tower, I want to visually change this mesh to represent what tower we're actually building. So off of this return value, we could set this up. Do we want to set it up there? Actually, let's do that. To kind of avoid some of the confusion, I think, let's go inside of our builder tower and we'll set that up inside of here. So on begin play of our builder tower, so this is going to be like our half invisible tower, on begin play, let's get out that tower data that we just saved inside of it, and let's use this mesh, and let's take our ghost mesh, and let's set static mesh, and we're going to set its static mesh to be the mesh that we just saved inside of that data. So and we could have done that here with this reference. We could have also gotten its ghost mesh, and we could have done the set static mesh in here, but let's just do that at begin play inside of that tower. So if we run through our logic, when we click, we're going to set a variable named to the row, and with that name, we're going to get out its row, we're going to spawn our builder tower, we're going to save what data is inside of it, we are going to save some references that we use later, we're going to remove our widget inside of our builder tower, we're going to change its static mesh to reflect the tower that we're building. On tick, we're going to have it follow our mouse, and then when we left click from our player, we're going to call its event called place tower, and we are going to build the tower that we are making. There's one more piece that we need to do, is that we need to tell our tower actor here, our spawn tower, our tower BP, we need to also feed it its data. I believe we stored a variable inside of it called tower struct. If we go inside of our tower BP, you can see its tower data we store as tower struct. All we need to do now is we need to tell it when we spawn it what its data is, and we store its data as tower data. Cool beans. And I think there's one more thing we need to do, is that over inside our builder tower, actually, like we did for our widget, let's actually go inside of our tower BP, and on begin play, let's call tower init, and we will set its static mesh just like we did over inside of our ghost tower. Let's try that out. So let's walk through it. When we hit play, when we hit Q, we pull up our widget. With our widget, we can select one of our towers. Let's select our bush tower, and nothing happens. So why is that? Did we have an issue? I believe we might be having an issue with our data table. So let's go back to our widget. Let's see here. Let's add a breakpoint on our spawn actor, and let's play that code again. When I hit Q and I hit bush tower, nope, okay, so it is finding the row. We are getting out its data. We are spawning it. We are storing. I think I might know the issue. So I'm going to remove that breakpoint and hit play. I think our bush might be underneath the ground. Is it underneath the ground? Let's see. Can we find our bush? We hit eject. I'm not seeing the bush anywhere. Let's search for actors. Let's search for our builder tower. So our builder tower exists. Where is our builder tower? Our builder tower is over in the wall. So let's see here. Why is that? If we hit possess, we're not seeing it. Let's try the chair. If we try and do the chair, is it spawning? No, it's not. Okay, so we broke something in the last minute. What exactly did we break? Let's see. Is it the static mesh? It could be the static mesh. So let's see here. When we go inside of our builder tower, on begin play, okay, so what might be happening here is let's hit a add breakpoint on our static mesh. We might not be having this data before the begin play. Let's actually check that out. So on play, let's hit Q, let's spawn our mesh. You can see it pauses. That is okay, it does have a value. What is our mesh? Let's print that. So it does have the data, so let's print it out. This is my, once again, I did not plan for this to happen. This is my normal debugging method. Maybe this is helpful for you. If this is not helpful, I apologize, but for me, this is normal course of game making. You will run into issues, you'll find new things, you'll learn new things. What I want to do is, since I couldn't highlight to see what mesh we were setting it to, I want to print out that mesh display name when we create that actor. So if I hit left click, I believe that's none. So I believe this mesh data is empty. Why is that? So we have a static mesh here. Let's see. When we had that, I think there could be an issue here. When I highlighted this, it said we had data, but I'm having a feeling maybe we didn't actually have the data. So I'm going to unhook this off of begin play, and I'm actually going to go back inside of our widget, and I'm going to do what I initially wanted to do, and we're going to set the static mesh inside of our widget when we first spawn the actor. So I'm going to get out of the actor, I'm going to get its ghost, I think we called it ghost mesh, and with this ghost mesh, I'm going to do here set static mesh, because I believe there might be a timing issue from when we're setting this tower data variable and from when this begin play is running. So I think there might be a little bit of disconnect there. So let's do this here, and let's set its static mesh. Let's break out this data. Let's get the static mesh, and let's set its static mesh from here. And let's see now, does it work? So when we hit Q and we hit build tower, there we go. So you can see how that was the issue. What was happening is that before this begin play was running, this variable wasn't quite set yet, even though we had it immediately after. So that's a little bit of learning, I guess, if you want to look at it. So we don't want to set its static mesh off of begin play. We want to set its static mesh here when we spawn it. So if that issue is happening with our builder tower, that probably also tells me we're going to have this issue inside of our tower BP off of event begin play here. So we're going to delete this tower init. But since we have this tower init on a custom event to set the static mesh, what we can instead do is inside of our builder tower where we are spawning our tower BP, after we set its data, let's call that event here, and we called that tower init, and then that should also fix the issue there. So let's try this out. I believe our code should be good to go now. On play, we can just create our widget, we can select bush tower, we can build a bush tower. Whoa. Our chair, okay, that chair is freaking out for a good reason. It actually looks quite funny, slightly cool. So we built one tower. So it's interesting. I can't hit Q again to create a new tower. So I believe that issue comes from the fact that inside of our player pawn, we are doing an is valid inside of our widget press. So that's actually quite curious for me, because normally when you destroy an actor, the is valid reference will come back false. Apparently with widgets, that's not quite true. And I guess that makes sense, because I believe widgets do actually exist in your world after you remove them for a short amount of time. And there's something I believe it's called like the garbage collector will eventually delete it, but that doesn't happen until quite some time later when the game decides to delete it. So we have an issue. So in two places, we are actually destroying our widget. We're destroying our widget here when we double press our key. So what we're going to do is we want to take our widget reference and let's set it to be empty here. And then there's one other place that we're destroying our widget, and the other place is actually inside of the widget itself here when we do remove from parent. So right before we do remove from parent here, let's grab our player reference and let's set that widget reference to be blank. So let's set reference of our widget to be blank. And now what that should be doing is that the two times that we will ever be destroying our widget, we are also setting it to be blank, so that the next time we press our button, this is valid should come back false, and it should create us a new widget. So let's try that out. So on play, if I hit Q, we can create a bush tower, and if I hit Q again, yep, we get a new reference, and we can create a chair tower. And our chair tower behaves just like it did before. What is our warning? Pended kill. Okay, that was all those projectiles freaking out. I thought we fixed this before, though. I thought we fixed this. So let's go back inside of our message log and let's check to see. It was referencing kill from node, access AI runner. Oh, that's not an issue to me. That shouldn't be an issue. The reason why is get vector length. No, we did do some bad math here. I checked this before, and I checked to see if we didn't do bad math. We don't want to check the distance to kill our projectile. So the logic here, I'll quickly run through it because we're actually running really late on this video. On tick of our projectile, when it was flying through the world, if our runner was dead, so he was not valid, instead of moving towards the runner, we were moving towards its last known location. On top of moving towards its last known location, we were checking to see how far away we were from that last known location. However, you can see my really bad math here. We were checking the distance from the target runner. We don't want to check the distance from the target runner. We want to check the distance from the last known location. That fixes that code. I apologize. Let me finish up this video very quickly. Are we done? Let's check. On play, we can create our tower. First tower, sure. Second tower, sure. They both behave well. The reason why this tower is freaking out is because we are no longer setting its values. It doesn't know what it wants to be, because if you remember, inside of the tower BP, we deleted the get data table from begin play, and we moved that over to our widget. So a tower that we now pre-place in the world is going to freak out and not know what it should be, so let's delete it, and we no longer have that issue. Okay, video done. What we did is we finished up our widget, we made it so that we can now create our ghost tower, and then with our ghost tower, if we go to its code, where is it? We can move it in the world on tick to be where our mouse is. We'll do some extra logic here later to see whether or not we should be able to build, and we'll flip-flop it between red and green, and that when we left-click from our player, we will place the tower in the world, and that we are feeding it its tower data, and that if you remember, back in our tower BP, this tower data is how our tower is handling its everything. So it's pretty cool. We're passing from our widget, we're getting the data table, we're passing that to our ghost tower, and then we're passing it from our ghost tower to our actual tower when we decide to build it. Cool beans, our game is really starting to shape up. I apologize, this video seems to be much longer than the others. Yeah, I'll try not to do that in the future, and we'll probably, if I ever do a video like this again, I'll try and break it up. But for now, I think that is pretty good, and I will see you guys in the next video.